The diesel engine breathed through a metal throat that barely broke the surface of the gray Atlantic, and Captain Lieutenant Werner Brandt listened to that breath like a man listening to his own heartbeat in the dark. The Snorkel was new. The Snorkel was genius. The Snorkel, his engineers promised, would keep them alive. It was February 1944, and the Bay of Biscay had become a graveyard for German submarines. Allied aircraft ruled the skies with radar that could spot a surfaced U-boat from miles away. In the previous year alone, the Kriegsmarine had lost over 200 boats. Entire crews vanished beneath the waves, their deaths marked only by expanding circles of oil and debris. The Battle of the Atlantic, once Germany's greatest hope for strangling Britain into submission, had turned into a slaughter, but U-771 carried the answer bolted to her conning tower. The Snorkel was a Dutch invention that German engineers had perfected. A simple tube with a valve at the top allowed the submarine to run her diesel engines while remaining submerged at periscope depth. No need to surface and expose the entire boat. No massive radar signature for prowling Sunderlands and Liberators to detect. Just a tiny metal head, lost among the endless waves. "We are ghosts now," said Obermaschinist Klaus Vogel, the young engineering officer. He stood in the control room with grease on his hands and pride in his voice. "The British cannot find what they cannot see." Brandt said nothing. He had commanded U-boats since 1941. He had watched too many confident men die to share Vogel's enthusiasm. The boat pressed northeast toward the convoy routes. 44 men lived inside this steel tube, breathing recycled air that tasted of oil and sweat and fear. The Snorkel helped, but it was imperfect. When waves washed over the head valve, it closed automatically to prevent flooding. The diesel engine, still running, would then suck air from inside the boat. Men's ears popped. Their lungs burned. Some fainted. Some vomited from the sudden pressure changes. Still, it was better than death from above. Funkmat Heinrich Lorenz, the radio operator, approached Brandt with a message slip. His face was troubled. "Herr Kowloon, I've been monitoring British frequencies. They keep mentioning something called mad patrols. The word appears in multiple transmissions." "Mad?" Brandt frowned. "An acronym?" "I believe so. I don't recognize it. Probably a new code name for their standard patrols. The British love their codes." Lorenz nodded, but he did not look convinced. He returned to his station, headphones pressed tight against his ears, listening to the enemy's secrets. Hours passed. The Snorkel hissed and gurgled. Men moved through their routines with the mechanical precision of sailors who had learned to function in a space smaller than a city bus. They ate cold food. They slept in shifts. They waited, then the hydrophone operator raised his hand. "Aircraft. Bearing 045, closing." The control room tensed. Men looked at each other, then at Brandt. In the old days, this would have meant crash dive, the desperate plunge to safety. But they were already submerged. The Snorkel protected them. "Maintain depth," Brandt ordered. "Steady as she goes." The sound of propellers grew louder in the hydrophone operator's ears. A British Sunderland, probably. A massive flying boat with enough depth charges to crack open a submarine like an egg, but the Snorkel head was barely visible. No radar return. The plane would pass overhead and see nothing but empty ocean. The propeller noise reached its peak. The men held their breath, then came the explosions. 0.3 depth charges detonated in rapid succession, so close that U-771 bucked like a wounded animal. Light bulbs shattered. Men were thrown against pipes and valves. Water sprayed from a dozen small leaks. "Dive! Take her down to 80 meters." Brandt shouted. The boat angled downward, fleeing into the darkness. Above them, the Sunderland circled, searching for evidence of a kill. Inside U-771, damage control parties worked frantically. The leaks were small, manageable. No critical systems destroyed. They would survive, but Brandt stood frozen at the periscope station, his mind racing. the aircraft had dropped its charges almost directly on top of them. Not a random pattern. Not a lucky guess. The pilot had known exactly where they were, but how? The snorkel had been submerged. No visual contact possible in these seas. The radar should have shown nothing but waves. Lorenz approached again, pale as a corpse. Mad, he whispered. Her Kowloon, before the war, I read theoretical papers about magnetic detection. Scientists believed that a large metal object could distort Earth's magnetic field enough to be detected from the air. They called it magnetic anomaly detection. Brandt stared at him. They said it was impossible to make practical, Lorenz continued. The equipment would be too sensitive, too unreliable. Apparently, Brandt said quietly, the British have made the impossible work. He looked up at the steel ceiling, as if he could see through it to the aircraft still circling above. The snorkel had hidden them from eyes and radar. But it could not hide 700 tons of steel from the Earth itself. The rules of the war had changed. And Werner Brandt realized, with cold certainty, that his boat had just become prey to a hunter he could not see, could not hear, and could not escape. The needle was the only thing that told the truth, and Flight Lieutenant James McAllister had learned to trust it more than his own eyes. From 300 feet above the Atlantic, the ocean looked empty. Gray water stretched to every horizon, broken only by whitecaps and the occasional shadow of clouds. But somewhere beneath that surface, submarines waited. The needle would find them. It was February 1944, and McAllister sat in the cockpit of a PBY Catalina flying boat, part of RAF Coastal Command's relentless campaign against German U-boats. The Battle of the Atlantic had reached a turning point. After years of devastating losses, the Allies were finally winning. New tactics, more aircraft, better radar, and broken German codes had transformed the ocean from a U-boat hunting ground into a killing zone for submarines, but the Germans had adapted. Their new snorkel devices allowed U-boats to stay submerged while running diesel engines. Radar, which had been so deadly effective, now struggled to detect the tiny snorkel head among the waves. The submarines had found a way to hide. The Allies had found a new way to hunt. The mad sensor hung beneath the Catalina's fuselage, a cylinder packed with sensitive magnetometers. It detected disturbances in Earth's magnetic field, the kind of disturbance created when 700 tons of steel passed through the water below. No periscope required. No radar return needed. The submarine's very existence betrayed it. Sergeant Danny Webb sat at the mat operator's station, watching the needle trace its lazy path across the graph paper. He was 22 years old, trained in electronics, and still not entirely certain he understood how the device worked. Something about magnetic flux and ferrous metals and anomalies in the planetary field. The instructors had called it science. The crews called it witchcraft. The witch, they named it. Because it found what could not be seen. Anything. McAllister's voice crackled through the intercom. Steady line, sir. No contacts. 6 hours into the patrol. 6 hours of flying over nothing. Webb's eyes ached. His back hurt from the vibration of the engines. He understood why some crews fell asleep at their stations, why they missed contacts, why submarines slipped through. He would not let that happen. McAllister was a methodical man, precise and controlled. He had lost his brother to a U-boat torpedo in 1942, a cargo ship sunk in the North Atlantic with all hands. He never spoke of it. He never showed rage or grief. He simply flew his patterns, dropped his charges, and marked his kills in the squadron logbook with the same careful handwriting he used for everything else. Webb found him unnerving. But he also trusted him completely. Coming up on Sector 7, the navigator announced. This is where intelligence says they're running. The Bay of Biscay was a gauntlet for German submarines. To reach the Atlantic convoy routes, U-boats from French ports had to cross this stretch of water, exposed to constant air patrols. Before Snorkels, Coastal Command had slaughtered them here. Now the submarines ghosted through, invisible to radar, and the kill rates had dropped. Mad was supposed to change that. Webb watched the needle. The Catalina droned on. Minutes passed like hours, then the needle twitched. Webb leaned forward, not daring to breathe. The needle twitched again, then jumped sharply to the right before settling back. "Contact," he said, his voice cracking. "Magnetic anomaly, bearing 270. McAllister banked the aircraft immediately. "Confirm." They flew over the spot. The needle spiked again, unmistakable this time. "Confirmed contact. Submarine, bearing 270, moving north-northeast." McAllister's voice was calm, almost gentle. "All stations, prepare for attack run. Depth charges armed and ready." The crew moved with practiced efficiency. The bombardier checked his sight. The gunners scanned the water for any sign of a periscope or snorkel head. They saw nothing. The ocean looked empty, but the needle knew better. McAllister brought the Catalina around in a wide arc, lining up for the drop. Webb called out updates as the magnetic signature shifted, the submarine moving beneath them like a fish in murky water. Release point in 15 seconds. The aircraft shuddered as depth charges fell away, splashing into the Atlantic in a careful pattern designed to bracket the target. Seconds later, the ocean erupted. For massive columns of white water burst skyward. The shock waves rippled outward in expanding circles. McAllister circled, searching. Webb watched the needle, waiting for it to go flat, the sign of a kill. Nothing. The needle still twitched, weaker now, moving away. "Contact heading south, sir. Deep and fast." The submarine had escaped. Damaged, perhaps, but alive. McAllister said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, marked the position. "We'll report the contact. Someone else may catch him." Webb slumped back in his seat. They had come so close. The witch had found the enemy, had pointed directly at him, and still he had slipped away. "How do they do it?" he asked. "How do they survive?" McAllister's answer came through the intercom, steady and cold. "They're sailors, Danny. Same as us. They learn. They adapt. And they fight to live." A pause. "But the Earth doesn't lie. Every time they move through the water, they bend the magnetic field. We'll find them again." The Catalina turned back toward its patrol pattern, hunting for ghosts in the endless gray sea. The air inside U-771 had turned poisonous, and every man aboard could taste the war in their lungs. Carbon dioxide built up faster than the scrubbers could clean it. The snorkel valve had closed 3 times in the past hour, waves washing over the head and sealing it shut while the diesel engine sucked oxygen from the crew compartments. Men gasped and stumbled. Some bled from their noses. One sailor had collapsed near the torpedo tubes and not yet woken up. It was March 1944. 3 weeks since the first attack. 3 weeks of running, hiding, dying by inches beneath the gray Atlantic. Werner Brandt had not slept in 2 days. He stood in the control room, gripping the periscope housing for balance, watching his men suffer and knowing he could not help them. The snorkel was keeping them submerged, keeping them hidden from radar, and the snorkel was slowly killing them, but the alternative was worse. 4 more attacks had come since that first Sunderland nearly destroyed them. Each time, aircraft appeared from nowhere, dropping depth charges with impossible accuracy. No warning. No visual contact. Just the sudden thunder of explosions and the screaming of tortured metal. The crew had begun to crack. Matros Friedrich Baumann, 18 years old, sat in the forward torpedo room with his hands over his ears, rocking back and forth. He had joined the U-boat service for honor, for glory, for the iron crosses that his father had earned in the last war. Now he flinched at every sound. He wept when the hydrophone operator reported aircraft engines. He had stopped eating. Brandt found him there during the midnight watch. "Friedrich." He kept his voice soft. "Look at me." The boy raised his head. His eyes were red, his cheeks hollow. He had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. "They know where we are," Friedrich whispered. "They always know. We can't hide. We can't run. They're going to kill us all. Brant sat down beside him on a torpedo rack. The weapon beneath them was loaded and ready, a G-7E electric torpedo that could sink a 10,000-ton freighter. Such power, and yet they were helpless against enemies they could not even see. Do you know what makes a U-boat sailor? Brant asked. Friedrich shook his head. Not courage. Not skill. Endurance. Brant paused, choosing his words carefully. The sea has always wanted to kill us. Storms. Pressure. Cold. This is just another way. The enemy has found a new weapon, yes. But we will find an answer. We always do. What answer? Friedrich's voice cracked. They see through the water itself. Brant hesitated. He had been thinking about this problem constantly, turning it over in his mind during every sleepless hour. The British were using magnetic detection. Lorenz had confirmed it from intercepted transmissions. The device sensed the distortion that U-771 steel hull created in Earth's magnetic field, but magnetic fields weakened with distance. Every physicist knew this. The further from the source, the weaker the signal. Depth, Brant said finally. They hunt us from the air. Their sensors reach down through the water, but not forever. If we go deep enough, we disappear. How deep? Deeper than we're supposed to go. The Type VIC submarine had a test depth of 100 meters. Below that, the hull began to protest. At 150 meters, seams could fail. At 200, the boat would likely implode, but between 100 and 150, there might be a shadow. A place where magnetic signatures faded into the background noise of the Earth itself. Brant returned to the control room and called his officers together. Vogel, the engineering officer. Lorenz, the radioman. Chief Bootsman Hartmann, who had served on submarines since 1939 and survived more attacks than any man should. The British are tracking our magnetic field, Brant explained. Every piece of steel in this boat creates a signature they can read from above. The snorkel hides us from radar but not from this new device. Then the snorkel is useless, Vogel said bitterly. No. The snorkel still protects us from radar, still lets us run the diesels. But when they find us with their magnetic sensors, we must go deep. Deeper than standard operating depth. Deep enough to weaken the signal beyond their ability to track. Hartmann sucked air through his teeth. 150 meters. The hull won't like it. The hull will hold. We built these boats to survive. And if you're wrong? Brant met the old sailor's eyes. Then we die quickly instead of slowly. Better than drowning in our own carbon dioxide. No one argued. They had all seen the bodies of men who suffocated when snorkels failed. A quick death by pressure was almost merciful by comparison. The next day, aircraft found them again. The hydrophone operator called the warning. Propellers closing from the southwest. Brant ordered an immediate dive. Take her down. 120 meters. Then 150. The boat angled downward. The depth gauge climbed. 100 meters. The hull groaned, a low metallic moan that vibrated through every compartment. 120 meters. Rivets creaked. Somewhere aft, a pipe joint began to spray fine mist. 150 meters above them, depth charges exploded. The concussions reached down, shaking the boat, but distant now. Muffled. The charges were set to detonate shallower than this, and then, slowly, the sound of aircraft engines faded. The magnetic hunters had lost their prey. That I in the control room, no one spoke. They simply breathed, grateful for every heartbeat, knowing that survival had come at the cost of everything they once believed about their invincibility. The final crossing began at dawn, and both hunters entered the killing ground without knowing the other was there. James McAllister lifted his Catalina from St. Eval at 0547, climbing into gray clouds that promised rain before noon. Werner Brandt brought U-771 to snorkel depth at 0600, beginning the 18-hour run to Lorient that would either save his crew or bury them beneath the Bay of Biscay, March 1944. The war had become a contest of patience, technology, and nerve. The Allies had lost 3,500 merchant ships to U-boats since 1939. The Germans had lost nearly 600 submarines, with 30,000 crewmen dead. Neither side could afford to stop. Neither side could afford to lose. McAllister flew his search pattern with the mechanical precision that had kept him alive through 2 years of hunting. Danny Webb watched the Mad Needle, eyes burning, mind focused. They had been in the air for 6 hours. 6 hours of nothing but clouds and waves and the endless drone of engines. Below them, somewhere in that gray wilderness, submarines were running. The intelligence report said so. The broken German codes confirmed it. Boats were transiting from the Atlantic back to French ports, damaged and desperate, trying to reach safety before the hunters found them. The needle twitched. Webb sat up straight. Contact. Possible magnetic anomaly, bearing 185. McAllister banked south. They flew over the position. The needle spiked hard, unmistakable. Confirmed submarine. Moving north-northeast, estimated 8 knots. Inside U-771, the hydrophone operator heard the distant rumble of aircraft engines. Patrol plane, bearing 350. Closing. Brandt did not hesitate. Dive. Emergency deep. 150 meters. The boat plunged downward. Men grabbed handholds as the deck tilted. The depth gauge spun. 80 meters. 100 meters. The hull sang with stress, metal complaining against the crushing weight of water. 150 meters. The deepest they had ever gone. Above, McAllister circled the contact point. The Mad Needle flickered, weakened, then went flat. Lost him, Webb said. Contact has gone deep. McAllister studied the empty ocean below. The submarine commander had learned. They all learned eventually, the ones who survived. Magnetic detection had limits. Distance mattered. Depth mattered, but depth could not be held forever. Calculate his course and speed before he dove, McAllister ordered. Project where he'll be when he has to come up. Submarines needed to breathe. Batteries drained. Carbon dioxide built up. Eventually, every boat had to rise again. When U-771 came back to snorkel depth, McAllister intended to be waiting. For 3 hours, he flew a holding pattern. Fuel burned. His crew grew restless. Other aircraft came and went, covering adjacent sectors, reporting nothing. The Atlantic kept its secrets. Then, exactly where McAllister's navigator had predicted, the needle jumped. Contact. Same bearing, same heading. He's back. U-771 had surfaced her snorkel to charge batteries. They had no choice. 8 hours at depth had nearly killed them. Men had passed out from oxygen deprivation. The air scrubbers were failing. Brandt had ordered them up or they would have suffocated in the dark. Now the hunters were back. McAllister made his attack run. For depth charges fell, time to bracket the contact. The explosions shattered the surface in great white columns. The shock waves hammered down through the water. U-771 staggered. The concussions hit like fists, throwing men against walls, bursting pipes, cracking gauges. A seam in the engine room split open, and seawater poured in. Dive. All ahead full. Take her down. Brandt's voice cut through the chaos. The boat responded, angling downward even as damage control teams fought the flooding. 100 meters. 120. The leak was overwhelming the pumps. 140 meters. The flooding slowed as external pressure reduced the spray to a manageable stream. But the boat was wounded. Battery power falling. Air foul. Men injured. Above, McAllister circled. The needle went flat again. He's gone deep. Lost contact. Danny Webb stared at the graph paper, at the spike that marked where a submarine full of men was fighting to survive. Did we get him? Unknown. No debris. No oil. They searched for another hour. Nothing rose to the surface. The ocean kept its silence. McAllister finally turned the Catalina toward home. Fuel was low. The hunt was over. We'll mark this one as damaged, probable, he said. Someone may finish him. Or he may die on his own. He did not feel victory. He did not feel defeat. He felt only the weight of a war that had no clean endings, only survivors and statistics. U-771 limped into Loria 3 days later, barely afloat, her crew gaunt and hollow-eyed. They had survived by running at depths that should have crushed them, by staying down until men collapsed from bad air, by accepting damage they could barely repair. Brant stood on the conning tower as the boat entered the massive concrete submarine pen. No crowds greeted them. No bands played. The other crews watched in silence, reading the wounds on the hull and the faces of the men. Heinrich Lorenz climbed up beside his captain. They've beaten the Snorkel, Lorenz said quietly. It's not invisible anymore. Brant nodded. The magnetic hunters had changed everything. Every submarine leaving port would face this new threat. Many would not return. We survived, Brant replied. That's all any sailor can do. He looked up at the gray sky. Somewhere above the clouds, aircraft were still searching, their strange sensors reaching down into the ocean, finding metal that could not hide. The war would continue. Men would die. And the Earth itself had become a weapon neither side could control. The age of submarine invisibility was over. A new kind of war had begun.